Okay, our next speaker, Dr. Robert Faurisson, is rightly acknowledged to be the foremost revisionist scholar in the world today. In attaining this position, Robert has published dozens of articles in the journal, as well as many articles in other periodicals, books, booklets, and documents for legal cases. But as Robert himself really points out, one does not need all of this to question the Holocaust extermination myth. For that, you only need 9 words: show me or draw me a Nazi gas chamber. This challenge may be short and simple, but to date no one has been able to answer it. And until the answer is provided, the alleged extermination of millions of Jews as part of a Nazi policy or plan during the Second World War remains nothing more than a myth. In his native France, Robert's history has proved so unbearable that French authorities have passed special laws to inhibit his ability to spread his views. Over the years, these laws have been called upon many times to silence him. This marks the 9th time Robert has addressed the IHR conference, and each time he has brought us new insights and inspiration. Finally, on a personal note, Dr. Faurisson wanted me to tell everyone that he brought his tennis racket within this trip, and so after the conference he is offering anyone 10,000 French francs if they can beat him in a game of singles, of course the best of 3 games. So ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, despite the fact that he is a merciless brute on the tennis court, Dr. Robert Faurisson.
Dear Greg, I do not recognize you. The other day on the tennis court, you were so ferocious. I had to say at the end, I will never forgive, I will never forget. Ladies and gentlemen, the right title of my speech is My Revisionist Method. There was a mistake done in the paper, okay? No, I'm not used to compliments and congratulations since I'm coming from France. And you can imagine how I am treated in this country, in douce France. On the front page of Le Monde des Lettres, Pierre Vidal-Naquet quite recently said, in the presence of the lie of which Faurisson is the purest expression, one feels a kind of peculiarly philosophical giddiness. I hope you will not feel giddy. In Le Figaro, someone called Gérard Slama, on the 26th of May, said that I was the past master in the art of blackmailing scientific truth. Now there are also good news, all the same, from France, and especially with the book who has been published by a young lady called Valérie Higounet. It's a book totally against us, 700 pages. It's a thesis, in fact, and it's a very strange book because we are quoted so often that I would say that this book would be a good introduction for a layman who would like to know what the revisionist people are saying. And I think that she should be dragged in court for that. At the end of her book, there is something astonishing. There is a kind of interview written by Jean-Claude Pressac. You know that Jean-Claude Pressac is the darling of Klaasfeld, Vidal-Naquet, and all those people. But now, what is he saying? It's quite surprising. It seems that more or less he is abandoning exterminationism. He says that the dossier of the people who believe in the extermination is rotten, R-O-T-T-E-N. There are too many lies. He called them not Jewish lies, he called them communist lies. And listen to this. He says, can things be put right? And he gives the answer. Listen, it is too late. And he says that there is no future anymore for the official certainties. We have converted, perhaps, Pressac, I don't know. But I think that this is due to the fact that in May 1995, I had asked for Pressac to come into court for one of my numerous trials, and the stupid man came. I had no right to ask any question, but my lawyer had the right. And as I want to make the things easy for my lawyer, I said, you have only 2 questions to ask him. And Pressac was unable to answer. The first one was, you have recently published a book called Les crématoires d'Auschwitz, la machinerie du meurtre de masse. Okay? There are 60 pictures, illustrations, and so on. Could you show us a photo of a gas chamber or a drawing? And of course, Pressac was not able. And then he was asked, but what is a gas chamber? Describe. And he went on, as usual, talking about ventilations and ventilators. And the man was so lost that the presiding judge, a lady, tried to help him and said, but Mr. Pressac, a ventilator is supposed to ventilate. And Pressac, I can tell you because I was in the good place or the bad place. I could look at him, nearly cried. And he said to the judges, the 3 judges, you must understand that I have only one life. You must understand that I am alone in my battle. So you see, things are changing. Now, directly to my lecture or speech. You would be disappointed if it was not in 3 parts. It will be in 3 parts. The first part will be the revisionist method. You are going to be a little bit surprised, especially those who know nothing about French literature. But don't be afraid. I will make the things easy. First, this method in literature, because this was the case for me. I was a revisionist in literature before being a revisionist in history. I'll try to explain you this method. Then, that revisionist method in history, not only about the Holocaust. Then, in the third part, thinking of the new generation and of works that I cannot do anymore, it's too late for me, it will be, I will suggest new investigations into 3, 4, or 5 fields. First, the Einsatzgruppen question, then the children in Auschwitz, then the Anne Frank diary, something new about that, then the brown Jews. In France we call brown Jews the Jews who during the war collaborated with the Germans. And this is something important, and other things. Now, revisionism is not an ideology, okay? It's a method of working. It's the fact of checking and double-checking views which are generally accepted. And you may revise in every field, you see, in mechanics or in history or whatsoever. But there are different ways of practicing this revisionist method. It depends on you, on your character, on your education. So I am not going to tell you that I am going to expose you, to show you the best possible method. I'm going to try to tell you what is my method, because I had a special training, a special education, etc. I tried to find adjectives to qualify this method, and this is what I found. It's a method which is classical, direct, bold, daring, severe, very severe. Okay? It's something which is matter of fact. And sometimes I use this expression, it's a nuts and bolts revisionism. It's no big words. Be simple, which is so difficult. Go directly to the center of the question. And try to first bring me the pudding. Okay? I don't want words. I'm going to test the pudding, but bring me the pudding first. So no intellectual sophistication, no pedantry. And to begin with, you see that I have used the word method. I didn't say methodology. In December 1998, I attended a trial of my dearest friend, Ernst Zundel, in Toronto. And a Jewish lawyer said, the professor who wrote something about Ernst Zundel and his writings told us what was his methodology. What is your methodology, Mr. Faurisson? And my answer was, I have none. You should have seen the smile. He was so pleased. There we had a professor. He had no methodology. I said, I have only a method. And I think that I have noticed it, that very often people use the word methodology as a pretentious substitute to method. And when I got back to France, I opened my cherished dictionary, which is an American one, not a French one. It is the American Heritage Dictionary of the English language. And I looked at methodology, and there was a thing called usage note. And in this usage note, you could see too frequently used as a pretentious substitute to method. So I sent a photocopy to the Jewish lawyer and to the two judges, a funny tribunal with two judges. So it's a method which is, be careful, I would say, difficult and risky. There are even physical risks, since in this method you have to go sometimes in some places to ask some bad questions. You may be slapped on the face, you may go to jail. I'll give you some examples of that. It's the fact, for example, that when you have a problem, you mustn't be shy. You mustn't stay, for example, in archives and in papers. That's very easy to do. You have sometimes to go to face some people. And this is what I did, for example, with the father of Anne Frank. I'll tell you something about that. Or for Mr. Michael Berenbaum in the Holocaust Memorial Museum. He recently published quite a big book. A friend of Ernst Zundel offered me this book. I'm showing it on the camera. The Holocaust Chronicle. Okay? And listen. The sound of emptiness. The problem with Mr. Berenbaum is that he is writing books which are thicker and thicker. But, believe me, you need less and less your brain and more your muscles with Mr. Berenbaum. And try to find a gas chamber in it. Hundreds of photos, and you will see. You will see, yes, you will see two walls, and it is the Dachau gas chamber. Never used. Except that in one place, Mr. Berenbaum tells us that it has been a little bit used. And then another photo, and the Belzec gas chamber. Hard luck. It's the gas chamber in Auschwitz I, which is a falsification as we know now. So, revisionist method in literature. I'm going to try to be quick. In 1939, I was 10 years old, and I began to study Latin. Then, at 12 years old, I began to study Greek. And I think that I began to be a revisionist at 10 and 12. I'll tell you why. I loved Latin and Greek. But it's difficult. It's difficult to translate Latin into French or English, Greek into French or English, but it is more difficult even to translate French or English in Latin and in Greek. But I loved this. And I realized something which is terrible. It is that we are not able to read carefully our own mother tongue. We think that we are able, and we are not able. So when you have to translate... Oh, something wrong, sir? Okay. So when we have to translate, at that very time, we realize that we have not read carefully. And this is very difficult to do. And I think that you should, if you want to understand anything, you should put it in Latin, in Greek, or in Hebrew, or in Chinese. I mean, in something which is quite different from your mother tongue. And this is the way I used to practice. And it was a little bit difficult for me in French literature. I'm going to tell you why. In France, we are supposed to give to our pupils or students a short text in order for them to try to understand it and to comment it. And we have to give, professors have to give 2, 3, or 4 questions in order to help the pupil or the student to try to understand the text. This I did at the beginning when I was young. I obeyed. And then suddenly I decided not to do that because I realized that the pupil or the student, when they want to answer your question, in fact, they do not read the text itself, not carefully. So this is the way I used to do, and it was a little bit perilous. I said to my pupils, then to my students, when you have a text to study, try to understand the meaning of it and be careful. And this is terrible what I'm going to say. There is one meaning or no meaning. Don't confuse meaning with comment. And I gave them a kind of technique. I said, you have to read this text and forget the name of the author. Every time it will be auctor ignotus, which means unknown author. In this way you will have no prejudice. And please be careful with the title, because by the title the author tries to put a pressure on you. For example, I don't know, the author could say pure orange juice. You test it and it is not pure orange juice. So forget this, forget that, and treat poetry exactly as if it was prose, which is supposed to be a crime. And in France, you know that our intelligentsia is very sophisticated. They have invented all sorts of theories, and this one especially. When it comes to authors, which are complicated, and beginning in 1850, like Gérard de Nerval, Arthur Rimbaud, Charles Baudelaire, Lautréamont, Apollinaire, Paul Valéry, you must not try to understand. But being as I am, I wanted to understand line by line, word by word. And believe me, I would sometimes spend or waste weeks or months on a short text, a difficult text of Gérard de Nerval. And perhaps the method was good, since I obtained some results, and in the 1960s, I made a name for myself. I was known at that time. I had a wonderful life. Once I wrote that my life was in 4 parts. First one, for my family, my wife, my 3 children, and the pleasures of life. Second part, my job, teaching. Third part, my researches in literature. And fourth part, I must confess, you imagine, my research in history. I perhaps should have stopped at that time. Perhaps I should not have gotten into this 4th part, but I went into this 4th part. So, now this method in history. First, I used this method of interrogation, very precise, about what we call the Bloody Summer of 1944, the big purge in France. I tried, as usual, to take a little part of France and to try to study the question of the people who had been executed by the maquis, the resistants. And for this it was very difficult and it was dangerous. I had to go and to ask questions even to people who had been in the firing squad, asking them, how is it that you did this? how did you do this? It's a very difficult way of working. You have to go and see the places. You have to get the names right. And at that time in the 60s, people were very afraid. But this I did. And I wrote some things about that. You must remember that during the war, we are told that there were resistants in France. Yes, but I would say, they say resistants and collaborators. Myself, I say there were two kinds of resistants. Resistant to the German occupation and resistant to the communist terror during the war. Now, coming to the Holocaust, how did I proceed? And this is the way I did. I heard people saying, for instance, that the gas chambers existed. Other people were already saying they did not exist. But what is the revisionist method, according to myself, my character? It was to say, okay, I see that people are disputing about that, but a simple question, what is a Nazi gas chamber? I need to see one. So I went in Paris to the Centre de Documentation Juive Contemporaine. And I remember the archivist was there, and he said, what do you want? And I said, a photo of a Nazi gas chamber. And the man, excuse me, the man said, we have many books. I said, a photo. We have many testimonies. I said, a photo. We have many documents. I said, a photo. And then I remember he called Mrs. Imbert. I remember the name. Come on. This gentleman wants a photo of a Nazi gas chamber. And I swear, she said, we have many testimonies. And the archivist, exasperated, said, but this gentleman wants a photo. Okay, sit down. I sat down for 60 minutes. And this poor lady was going into the shelves, opening a book, closing the book, opening a book, closing the book, and so on. And she brought me, poor lady, a photo that everybody knows, the American soldier with his helmet on front of disinfestation gas chambers in Dachau and things like that. So I thought, this is a problem. Then my direct method was not to study documents like that, but to go to the center of the center. And I would say the center of Jewish documentation. They had a file called extermination gassings. So I said, oh, I'm lucky, because the best of the accusation against Germany will be there. I'll take the best. So I went through the best, and I found exactly nothing. Then I decided to go and visit the places. I went first in Struthof, Natzweiler, near Strasbourg, and I discovered what it was. In fact, it was not at all a gas chamber, although you have big signs saying gas chamber. And as soon as I published the result of my inquiry, the gas chamber was closed. And try to visit. You have still the sign, and they say, we cannot show you because there is vandalism, people destroying and so on, which is a story. I went to Majdanek, and this is the way I proceeded. I saw the place where we were supposed to have a gas chamber, and I saw a building with Bad und Desinfektion. And I thought to myself, I'm going to visit this place and to see what I'm going to find. Either I will find bad disinfection and period, or bad disinfection and something else, suspicious, you see. And what I found was exactly bad and disinfection. And with something quite characteristic, a little stove closed to the so-called gas chamber, the stove, you see, for disinfection, and in the door, the place of a thermometer. So it's a kind of police investigation or criminal investigation. So I went also to Auschwitz and to Treblinka and places like that. And it was a constantly disappearing gas chamber. As soon as I would approach, there was no more gas chamber. And I would never ask any question to a guide. We know very well that those poor people, they are repeating a lesson. But every time I wanted to have a specialist of the place, and I would ask him an explanation. And there were no explanation. So I published in 78-79 only one article and one letter in the journal in Le Monde. And in Le Monde, I asked a very simple question. Always be very simple. I said, how is it technically possible to get into a gas chamber to collect the bodies, since it would be as entering an ocean of hydrocyanic acid, and to touch bodies which are extremely dangerous, since by touching the skin you might poison yourself. And how could you do such a physical effort to take those bodies, since we know very well that if you want to go to aerate a place where you had hydrocyanic acid, in the case of a disinfestation, you must not even try to open a window which is difficult to open, because your breath will accelerate the processes and you would be poisoned. So I said only, how could you tell me how it was possible technically? And you know the answer of Pierre Vidal-Naquet, Léon Poliakov, and 32 other historians. They had a marvelous answer. They said, one must not ask why such a mass murder was technically possible. It was technically possible since it happened. This they said on the 21st of February, 79. I should have stopped. I should have said, that's okay, they are unable to answer. I am going to wait for an answer. But I don't know why I kept on battling and battling. And I was the first to publish the plans of those places. They should have published those plans. In 1995, on the 19th of January, I had the shock of my life. I had many shocks in my life. I opened a magazine called L'Express. There was a very long article of an historian who is totally against us, Éric Conan. The title was Auschwitz, la mémoire du mal, the memory of evil. And on page 68, I saw this about the gas chamber in Auschwitz I. Everything in it is false. False. And he said falsifications. It was easy for Faurisson to say that. All the more since the authorities of the museum balked at responding him. So there we are. I was supposed to be the falsifier. Those people were supposed to say the truth. And you see, in 1995, somebody comes and says, Faurisson was right, so what? Something which is important, and it's surprising that even Fred Leuchter didn't use this argument. I don't know why. If you want to show, for example, that the outputs of the German ovens were impossible, you have something very simple to do. You don't need to write 200 pages. You go and see a crematory today, you see the output today, and you compare. Okay? But for the gas chamber, do you know that you could do exactly the same thing? Go and visit an American gas chamber. Why don't you do it, you American people? You could see how complicated it is. Now, of course, we know very well that some sophistications are, for example, are something of a luxe. Perhaps we don't need that. But take it as it was in 1924, when for the first time they tried to gas someone in the United States. You will see how horribly complicated it is necessarily. So you need only to have this gas chamber of an American penitentiary on the one hand. On the other hand, you have a so-called Nazi gas chamber. You will see that it is impossible. Now, not only you have to go on the spot, but you have to go and see people. And this is what I did. Now, sometimes people would visit me. For example, Deborah Lipstadt visited me in France. She came from Los Angeles, yes, to visit me. And I can tell you something about that. The poor lady, yes, Deborah Lipstadt, she came in Vichy, France, to visit me. And there I was, waiting for her questions. She had questions only on the Jewish problem, on the Jews. I told her, but you see, I'm not very interested. I am not specialized in the Jewish question. I am waiting for your questions about my writings and my arguments. And I saw that she was an ignoramus. She didn't know anything even about Raoul Hilberg. And at one point, it was so desperate that I asked her a stupid question. She was there in the chair, and I said, "Are you married?" You see, she came from Los Angeles, I think. "Are you married?" "No." "Why aren't you married?" Do you imagine if ever David Irving could put some question to this lady? It would have been great fun. So you have to go where the danger is. This is how I visited Michael Berenbaum in 1994. He had received a visit of Ernst Zundel, I think, and perhaps of Bradley Smith, or he had corresponded, I don't know. So I went to the place in the Holocaust Memorial Museum. I finished my visit with my two American friends. It was 3:45, and in the lobby, I asked to phone to Michael Berenbaum. And I was very surprised. I said on the phone, "My name is Robert Faurisson. I want to visit you." And the man immediately answered, "It's 3:45. It means that at 4:15 you will be in my office." I think he was waiting me for 1 year. And when I got into the place, I saw on a sofa two gentlemen. They were the directors of the museum. And Berenbaum was there. On my right, on my left, I had my witnesses. And Berenbaum said, "So, what are your questions?" And I said, "Downstairs in the book, I have written, I have visited this place on the 30th of August 1994. I love dates. I have not found any answer to my challenge. Show me or draw me a Nazi gas chamber." Although I knew that there was a mock-up, I wanted Berenbaum to say that it was a good mock-up. I knew that he wouldn't say that. And he said, "Why should I answer your questions? Because you see, who do you have on your side? Ernst Zundel, Bradley Smith. You must know that for 1 year in 1 year we have received 2 million visitors. So who are you?" And I said, "But you see, you have to answer my question on the book." He said, "I don't see why." And suddenly I had an idea. I said, "Yes, you have to answer. Because you are accusing Germany." And for the first time of his life, I think, he realized that he was accusing Germany only by saying that the gas chamber had existed. And I nearly received a slap on the face. He went mad. And I thought he was asking for the security. In fact, I think he stopped the tape, you see. And during 1 hour, I tortured the poor man. You see, a revisionist must be a little bit sadistic. He must come back and say, "Is this the tooth which hurts you?" "Yes, really this one." You must go back. And you see, I have to go quickly. I'm sorry. And this is the way I tried to do all my investigation. When it was revisionism in literature, my model was Champollion. You understand Champollion? In 1822, he is the man who deciphered the hieroglyphics. Hey? No big words, nothing. He was there trying to understand word by word. And believe me, before the deciphering by Champollion, do you know that you had many professors who were able to talk about those texts that they didn't understand? And of course, the explanations were always marvelous. It was an invocation to the gods, the souls of I don't know what, or whom, etc., etc. And when the deciphering came, you would see that it was so many cows, so many goats, so many sheep. That's the way intellectuals tend to work. Always big ideas, always philosophy. I hate philosophy. I hate because I do not understand, in fact, of course. But my model, if you want, of revisionism in history would be Sherlock Holmes. And you have to be courageous. You see? You have to go on the spot. And so you have to be very short, and this is how I came to this no holes, no Holocaust thing that you know. Surprisingly, I already said this 6 years ago, and I remember that nobody reacted. Nobody seemed to understand, because perhaps of my poor English. But 2 or 3 years after, people like Robert Countess suddenly said, but we have to be careful. It's very short. I understand that myself. When it is very short, maybe it's too short, you see. Complicated things cannot be put, it seems, in few words. So I understand very well why the people are careful and distant. But sometimes it's a good thing. And I think it was a good one, because this is the way I explain no holes, no Holocaust. When you have a very big problem, you know very well that you cannot embrace, do you say that in English? You cannot embrace the whole of it. It's impossible. It's too much. So what must you do? You must go courageously into the center of the core of it. And the center of the Holocaust, it's Auschwitz. Auschwitz is the capital, okay? So you have like a big circle, which is H, Holocaust, with quotation marks. I never say Holocaust myself. I don't use kosher words. So a big circle, which is H, Holocaust. Then a circle like this, A, like Auschwitz. Now, what is the center of Auschwitz? It is C, crematories, supposed to have a gas chamber to kill people. And what is the center of that? It's, among the crematories, the only one about which they say it is authentic. They don't say it anymore about Auschwitz I. They say it about Auschwitz II, the crematorium number 2. And they say this is the place untouched, except that the Germans, when they left the place, destroyed it. I don't know if it is the Germans or the Russians. I don't care. And they say this is the place. So we have to go to this place. And we have to find the holes, because the center of all this are the holes through which the dirty SS was supposed to drop his Zyklon B. Go on the spot and try to find those holes. You will not find one. Now, big news. Yesterday, Charles Proven gave me this. He is revising my revisionism, which is quite a good thing. Now I'm going to revise his revising of the revisionism. But I am sorry, I have not finished the reading. So I must be careful. I'm going to give you my first impressions. And I said to Charles Proven, where are you, Charles? Okay. I told him that I would say something about that. I think that it's a good work. First, it is short. It's not like Berenbaum. You don't need muscles. It's well done, apparently well done, and it is precise. And you could see that there is some hard working in it. So, good for you. But, you see, you made a terrible mistake in method. And I would like to explain you this afterwards. To put it shortly, you mustn't mix up testimonies and what you find on the spot, which is material. I'm going to give you an example. Instead of separating what we can see as supposed holes on the place and the testimonies, you begin by the testimonies, but in the testimonies you are talking about what we are supposed to find on the place. So you are mixing up things. And to take a comparison, instead of putting oil, vinegar, and then vinaigrette, you brought vinaigrette first And there you are, working very hard to try to distinguish oil and vinegar, which is too difficult, you see. More about that later on, okay? But it's hard working, and we have to take it seriously. Now, about the revisionist method for the new generation, I must say that I was very moved to see something that I'm going to describe you. When I arrived, I saw Germa Rudolph and Jürgen Graf. They were there working very hard. This is the new generation. And the first man I hope they are not there. This is the new generation. And the first one, Germa Rudolph, is in exile. What a shame. Far from his far from his homeland, from his wife, from his 2 children. And Jürgen Graf, Switzerland, supposed to go to jail for 15 months. Is it not a shame? And those people, you should have seen them. They were joyful, working and working very hard. So, it's for people like that that I'm going now to speak and to give some ideas of some investigations. Let me begin with the Anne Frank diary. Perhaps you remember that I visited the father of Anne Frank in Basel, Switzerland, in the 70s. He was quite a charming man, like all the con men, very charming. Sometimes you hear people saying, but he was so charming, how could he have been a con man? But a con man is always charming. So I visited him and I said, this is my way of doing. I like to talk to the people in the eyes. I said, I have serious doubts about the authenticity of this Anne Frank diary. And he said, oh, that's okay. I'm ready to answer your questions. And I was lucky enough to have Mr. Frank and his wife. The wife was very important in the story, you will see. And he said, I'm ready for your questions. Yes, but he was a little bit like Mr. Michael Shermer. Perhaps he thought, oh, this is a French intellectual. It's going to be very intellectual. Psychology and so on. And I came with my nuts and bolts revisionism. And I said, Mr. Frank, you were supposed not to make any noise, even during the night. If ever you had to cough, you would take codeine. And you were 8 people in this place in Amsterdam. There were enemies listening. Okay. Yes. So how is it that sometimes the young man, Peter, is in the, how do you say, up on the top of a house? Yeah, in the attic. He's splitting wood to show his strength to Han. You imagine the noise? Or building furniture. And there is the alarm clock every morning. There is the radio. The screams of the people that the dentist is healing and so on. How do you explain that? He had no explanation. Then I said, what about the garbage? You see the French intellectual? What about the garbage? You say that it was burned in the stove. Yes, but you got into the place on the 12th of June. And you light up, you see, the stove for the first time on, I think, the 12 or 15 of October. So during the summer, what about the garbage? And what about the smoke? It was a place supposed to have nobody in it. So smoke means that there is somebody, especially during the night. See the smoke during the night. And he had no answer. And I asked many questions of that kind to the poor man. And the lady was there, the wife, saying, "Oh, surprising, yes, how did you manage? Oh, how was it possible?" and suddenly, this was in English, and suddenly he told her, "Maul su." Shut up. And I went and suddenly he had, do you say stroke of genius? Yes. He had a stroke of genius. He told me, "Mr. Faurisson, I agree with you 100%. Technically, no, scientifically, I think. And scientifically, theoretically, it is impossible. But so it was." So I told him, "Oh, you put me in trouble, Mr. Franck, because if you agree with me that a door cannot be at the same time open and closed, and we don't need theoretically, scientifically, and if you add that yourself you have seen such a door, you put me in trouble. So please answer my questions." And of course, no answer. The next day, he brought me in a Swiss bank. This was the first time that I was in a Swiss bank. And into the, how do you say that, the cellar. And I saw those impressive places where you could put your money, your jewelry, your manuscripts, and so on. And he took the manuscripts and he tried, you see, this is a kind of bluff, saying, "Those are the manuscripts, okay? See." So we went to his house to see the manuscripts. And I said, "But Mr. Franck, I am not a specialist of handwriting. I am not interested. I want you to explain me how the story stands. And it's impossible." So when I went back from this place, I wrote a kind of report, and a judge, a German judge, decided that there would be an analysis of the handwriting. And we must, revisionist people, we have to be very careful. Very often I hear people saying, and they discovered that there were handwritings with a ballpoint pen. Be careful, be careful. The report is an absolute poor report. The conclusion is that everything is from one hand. So remember that. And they said that there were some handwritings with a ink of a ballpoint pen, but they do not give any precisions. You don't know how much and how many and so on. So be careful with that. In 1986, Otto Heinrich Franck died in 1980. In 1986, suddenly, 4 books as nearly thick as this one that I showed you, in 86 up till 92, a scientific edition of the diaries of Anne Frank was published in Amsterdam. And people thought, this is an answer to Faurisson. And they say in it, this is an answer to Faurisson. Yes, but be careful. Number one, you should read this. Yes, I said 4 books because you had the Dutch, I have at home the Dutch edition, the German edition, the French edition, the English edition. You should read what they say about Otto Franck. They nearly say that he is a liar. So I was right. when he said, you see, that this was the diary of my daughter. You should read what they say at the end of this scientific edition. But all over this book, what do? It's a bluff. They show you handwritings, and they say, you see, it's the same thing. I don't see that it is the same thing, but I am not a specialist, so I must be careful. But the question is not this one. The question is answer the question of Faurisson, which is explain me the story. Instead of that, at the beginning, they tried to summarize what I had said. But it was, how do you say that, a caricature of what I had said. If I had said stupid things, they should have reported exactly what I had said. So they didn't answer. So I say, be very careful. The question of the handwriting of Anne Frank is what you call, I think, a red herring. Yeah, you call this? Yeah. So,
3 minutes, Doctor.
Please?
3 minutes.
Oh, my dear. Yeah. Impossible. Impossible is not French. I'm sorry. So, I would like someone able to, on a computer, knowing Dutch and German, to make today a comparison between the Anne Frank diary as it was published, the popular edition, and the new popular edition of a woman called Miriam Pressler. I had myself discovered 2 or 3 different Anne Franks. Now I think that it's like 8 or 10 Anne Franks, if you make this kind of work. Now, about the Einsatzgruppen, I think it's the most important. Excuse me. Excuse me. I would like a work done on this topic. Listen. The Germans who were executed by the German army because they had killed Jews. Yes. In Marinka, a place in Russia, you had the mayor of the city. He had killed 1 Jewess. He was, by the German army, court-martialed, condemned to death, and executed. And I have many, many examples of this. Feldmarschall List, von Küchler, Manstein, General Otto Dessler, von Kleist, General Kittel, all those people decided the execution of German soldiers or officers or civil servants who had killed 1 Jew or 1 Jewess or a group of Jews. So please explain me that. If there was a physical extermination policy of the Jews, how could you explain that? In my opinion, now of course this is a joke, in the alley of the Righteous Gentiles in Jerusalem, you should have a tree for Manstein, for List, Küchler, Kleist, Kittel, and why not Adolf Hitler? Because Adolf Hitler had decided that people who would kill 1 Jew or 1 Jewess should be executed. This is a kind of things that we should do. I have no time to talk about the brown Jews, the Jewish children, and what I would call the counter guide of the Holocaust Memorial Museum. I would like somebody to go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum and to make a kind of revisionist guide of it. Okay. I have time? 1 more minute. Okay. Excuse me. You heard about my pessimism, okay? I want to answer about that. For reasons that I have no time to say, I am rather pessimistic. But you see, Let me explain you that. My friend Jim Brugger received me in this country for the first time in 1979. I came to the airport with the book of butts and a tennis racket. He told me that yesterday, or the day before yesterday. And he asked me a question. He's from German extraction. He said, "You are a French. Why do you that? Do you do that for the Germans?" I said, "It's not for the Germans." And my answer, he told me, my answer was, "But a bird sings. He can't help but singing. If it's in his nature to do what he does, he cannot help it." So even, you see, a pessimistic bird may sing all the same. And although I am an old bird, I think that I am going to continue to sing. The other day, leaving France, I received a phone call from one of my grandchildren, Adrien. He told me, "So you are leaving us?" And I said, "Yes." "Where do you go?" "Oh, I'm going to the United States." "Why?" "For work." And he's very gentle with me, very, very gentle. And he said, "Now, grandfather, you should stop. You are working day and night. You are very old. You are going to die very soon." But you see, I'm still alive and well.